Let's get some analysis now from Javier Farje. He's a Latin America analyst joining me live now from London. Javier, thank you so much for being with us on the program. I first want to get your thoughts on Trump's comments, especially the ones of him saying that he will now be controlling Venezuela.
It was an astonishing press conference. Donald Trump addressed it with his usual hyperbole, for want of a better word. But I don't think the key elements are not what he said in the main press conference, because he talked about the biggest operation since the Second World War and all the usual nonsense that we are used to it. It's what happened afterwards. When asked how they are going to control Venezuela, how they are going to run Venezuela, they were talking about coordinating with the current government. Rubio, the Secretary of State, said that they've been talking to Delcy Rodriguez, who is the vice president, who should be sworn as president of Venezuela according to the Constitution. It was an astonishing thing to say, because we didn't know they were going to do that, but they have talked about it. And when asked whether Maria Corina Machado, the leader of the opposition, the Nobel Peace Prize, who praised President Trump and said that he deserved to be the Peace Prize, when he was asked whether she should be a candidate or should be part of the process, he said, and I quote, Machado lacks the support or respect to lead the country. So what you can reach, the conclusion you can reach based on that is he turning his back on the opposition to work with the current government? That's a big question mark there. Now, they're talking about oil. He's talking about oil. Oil is the main concern for him. But who controls the oil? Venezuela. The armed forces are still very much behind the Bolivarian project, which means that maybe pragmatism has prevailed over pride and have decided to work with the current government to have what he called an orderly transition to democracy. We don't know what that implies. We don't know whether there's going to be food on the ground. We were told by Marco Rubio after the operation that there was not going to be any more military operations in Venezuela. They actually cooperated with the current government. That looks that it is what's happening based on what we heard in the press conference. It was astonishing. The main body of the press conference was his usual, over-the-top rhetoric. Is the questions that were asked later that gave us a clue of what's really happening between Venezuela and the United States.
Do you think that we will witness a lot of resistance from members within the military, from members of cartels within the country to Trump and his aspirations within the country?
Well, the armed forces has always been part of the political project of Hugo Chavez. The armed forces in Venezuela are the most politicized armed forces in the continent. And they've always been behind the so-called Bolivarian revolution. Now that Maduro is not there, they have to find a replacement. But the main key elements are Vladimir Padrino and Diosdado Cabello. Vladimir Padrino is the defense minister and Diosdado Cabello is the interior minister. They control the armed forces, they control the police. That means that they're going to have a great deal to say about this. Most of them come together with Delcy Rodriguez were key members of the Maduro government from the time Hugo Chavez was alive. That means that they're going to have to work together to see how they can deal with this. But there could be resistance, but there might be an agreement. But if Marco Rubio said that he's talking to Delcy Rodriguez in Venezuela, maybe they're going to try to reach a compromise which will prevent any kind of resistance from the armed forces. That's the only conclusion we can reach from that astonishing press conference.
What about the other scenario where they're unable to reach an agreement? What happens then?
Well, it will have to be an invasion. An invasion will have to be approved by Congress in the United States. There are many members of the Republican Party who are very unhappy about the possibility of the United States invading another country. It's been told, it's been mentioned many times here that the last time was in 1989, Panama. But it would be an invasion, and that would be a mess, because there would be a lot of resistance. There would be resistance from armed groups, from volunteers, from militias, from the armed forces. And maybe that's exactly what Trump is trying to avoid by negotiating with the current government in Venezuela. That would make perfect sense in terms of being pragmatic and avoid a bloodshed and avoid an absolute mess that would go against Trump's plans to survive the midterm election, because we mustn't forget that in the United States, any actions they take abroad has a lot to do with internal politics. And he has that problem with the next midterm elections. And the MAGA movement is very divided. So he's going to try to avoid, obviously, based on what we have heard today, he's going to try to avoid that conflict and maybe negotiate with the current government to avoid any confrontation with the army.
How do you think the public, civilians, regular Venezuelans feel about the idea of having major U.S. influence within the region, given the history there?
Well, Venezuelans at the moment, one of the priorities was to survive. The economic situation in Venezuela is very, very bad. They survive with, I mean, $1, $2 a month, which is astonishingly low. That has been the priority at the moment, survival. If they believe that the Americans can help solve that situation, they will accept it. Because Venezuelans, I've spoken to Venezuelan people, I've spoken to colleagues of mine in Venezuela who know and talk to the people all the time. I've been there, I was there some years ago, and the priority for the Venezuelan people is to survive, survival. That is the key word here. So if the United States can guarantee some kind of, I don't know, welfare or some kind of benefits from the president of the United States, they won't complain about that.
And we also heard Donald Trump warning neighboring countries as well. He warned Cuba, he warned Colombia. He told the Colombian president to once again watch his back. What do you make of those comments?
Well, whatever happens in Venezuela affects Colombia, definitely. They share 2,200 kilometers of border with Venezuela. President Petro has been very critical of President Trump in many aspects, including Gaza, including the drug policies, etc. The warning, Colombia will not get involved militarily in Venezuela for the resistance. It's not going to happen. Probably the guerrillas that wander around between Venezuela and Colombia will do that, but they will not get involved in any kind of armed conflict. In terms of Cuba, the Cubans, I spoke to somebody from the embassy of Cuba here, and they are really worried about whether they are going to be next. That's going to be worried about that. Now, they're talking about all people running Cuba. We don't know whether that's going to be the case. I mean, maybe once he's done with the oil, because Cuba doesn't have oil, Colombia doesn't have oil, and Venezuela does. So once he secure oil production and a participation in the oil production in Venezuela, he will probably forget about Cuba and Colombia. He will not intervene in Colombia. I doubt it, because he has no reasons to do that. And in case of Cuba, Cuba is in a very bad situation at the moment. The economic situation is pretty bad, and I don't believe he will actually do that. He's always doing that. He's always issuing threats, but I don't believe that's going to be a concrete sort of action he's going to take against these two countries.
Okay, Latin America analyst Javier Farje, thank you so much for being with us here on TRT World.
My pleasure.